go ahead and start our presentation. Well, right now we have about 148 points left in the course. We have the interactive text online. Everyone needs to make sure that they go through the book and answer those questions. As stated before, it's 5 points for every chapter. Chapter 6 is the first chapter. We still have some in-class activities, some of which will now be moved online, and you'll use Canvas pages to access those for this particular platform. There's also going to be the Canvas quizzes, and we do still have the presentation scheduled for April 7th for some of the students that did not do the not-for-profit. We do have one final homework, and then, of course, our final exam. So today we're actually going to begin our governmental section of the course. There are 3 different kinds of funds. They are governmental, proprietary, and fiduciary. We're going to begin by talking about the governmental type. This is the basic kind. There are 5 of them. They use a different measurement focus than what we have been discussing in our not-for-profit, in our business accounting. Specifically, as you can see, the governmental accounting uses the current financial resources measurement. This means that they're only concerned with what we're trying to spend and receive right now. So a good example of that would be the fact that there are no long-lived assets reported and there are no long-term liabilities. This means when we buy a building or some asset that is a capital asset, instead of debiting that asset, instead we're going to debit capital outlay expenditure. We're going to see some of those transactions throughout the remainder of the semester. Well, let's start with the number 1 fund in the governmental funds, and that is the general fund. Now, this fund is in every single local government. They only have one, and this is what they're going to use for the day-to-day activities of the fund. Kinds of resources that are used for this fund include those that you see listed under inflows. After the general fund, we then have our special revenue fund. Now, if you look at the title of that fund, you should know that everything that would go into that fund is related to some very restrictive revenue purposes. So you can see from the bulleted points here that we're talking about a dedicated source of revenue. Generally, a local government will pass a tax or a law of some kind in order to collect this revenue for a specific purpose. The third governmental fund is the debt service fund. This is only related to other general government obligations. So you won't see in here any other type of funds such as the proprietary or fiduciary I mentioned in the beginning. This is only the 5 governmental type funds. And this is where we're going to keep track of all of the resources that we're going to store in order to pay principal and interest on long-term debt. Next is the capital project fund. This is what we're going to use to keep track of all of the projects that we have going in which we're trying to build something that's going to be used for later use. This is generally not for something we're going to just purchase. It's generally something that's going to take a while to bring into fruition. An example would be the construction of a city hall. That's something that we're going to have to get parts. It's going to take months. There's going to be billings. So a capital project fund is what we're going to use whenever we're building something for the governmental type funds. And finally, this is the 5th of the 5 governmental funds, the permanent fund. I generally like to remember this one as it typically includes libraries and cemeteries. So it's a fund, just like we learned in the not-for-profit section, that is permanent. It's always there. It is used to support the government or the citizens, and we do the exact same kind of accounting, the current financial resources measurement that we do with the general fund, except it's highly restricted. So here are the 3 types of funds that we need to be able to segregate between. So I just went over all 5 of the governmental type funds. Here they are listed for you. As you can see, little brief explanations of each of the five and what it would take to fall into each category. You will be expected to know what types of transactions would go to which type of fund. We will begin by knowing the difference between which types of transactions are governmental, and then which are proprietary, and then finally which are fiduciary. Here are our two proprietary type funds. The one thing you'll notice about these is they are business-like. So they use full accrual, just like we learned in business accounting and not-for-profit accounting. The only difference between these two funds is who is the primary customer. So the enterprise fund, we're going to say that the customer is generally some people outside of the government. It doesn't mean the government itself isn't using it. For example, we usually would consider a water utility an enterprise fund because the primary customer is the citizens of the city. Does the city itself use water? Yes, it does, but the primary customer is outside, so we would call that an enterprise fund, as compared to an internal service fund where we would use things like our printing shop, because the primary customer is indeed other departments within our local government, not for our citizens on the street to come in and utilize. So one of the other things to know about proprietary type funds is that they are generally self-sufficient and that they are trying to earn a profit in order to pay for the services that they are rendering. The last type of fund is the fiduciary type fund. So there are only four of those. They're listed on your screen, and we're going to go through each of those next. You do have some top hat questions that you're expected to be able to answer using the Class 18 slides. And I'm just going to give this a pause section just for you to make notes, to remind yourself after listening to this video to go ahead and complete that in Top Hat. So now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the fiduciary funds because there's four of those. So we've already gone through the governmental type. There were five. So the four fiduciary funds are used for things that are not related to the government. These are things that the government is doing on behalf of other people. So you'll notice the biggest and largest fund is the pension trust fund. And then that is followed by the investment trust fund, the private purpose trust fund, and then the agency fund. So you will see that there are actually two statements that are done for these: the statement of fiduciary net assets and the statement of changes in fiduciary net assets. So I mentioned earlier that the pension fund is the largest fiduciary fund, and that's the one that we're going to hold all the resources. We're going to collect them from the individual pensioners if we're collecting, and we're also going to input as the employer money for future employees once they no longer work for the city. The next is the investment trust fund, which actually is just used when we are pooling funds from other local governments, perhaps, and we're trying to get to a higher amount of interest rate by having larger funds in which to invest. Next is the private purpose trust fund. This one is very rarely seen, but the easiest example is what they call escheat property. This would be things, for example, if you had a paycheck that you forgot to get, and that paycheck ended up going to the state. And then the state would hold it and supposedly try to locate you and provide you with that money. But if not, it would, after a while, be turned over to the federal government. So those funds are funds that are given to the government, but they only can be used or accessed by the specific person for which that they're entitled. The last of the fiduciary funds is the agency trust funds. Those are best seen as an example here is sales tax, but also like the child support agency, where the full responsibility is to take funds from one source and give those same funds to another source. So the balance sheet equation is actually different for this one. It only has two parts. Assets equals liabilities. There are no net assets. Now, occasionally there are multiple funds in a transaction. We're going to learn about interfund transactions. These are some examples of the four, but at this point I'm not expecting you to recognize them. I just want you to know that they do exist, interactivity with the funds. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of journal entries. In this example, we're talking about a central printing fund, in which case it's an internal service fund, and it's going to bill to other funds, which are both governmental type funds, the general fund and capital project fund. What we must keep in mind when we're dealing with governmental fund accounting is every fund must have both a debit and a credit when there is interfund activity. So let's look at a few. We're going to again go through the types of funds, and I'm going to use a question that I have here. So here is our question. I'm going to give you a moment to read through that. So one of the very first things you should notice is this particular transaction is a proprietary type fund. So you should be able to pick that out because they are charging a fee for service. And that lets us know that this is more than likely a proprietary type. Specifically, now we have to say who's the primary customer after we discover that it's a proprietary type, because remember there are two that fall in that category. It is the enterprise fund or internal service fund. And since this is a clinic that's providing outpatient care for children, it's not just for the city employees, it's for everyone. So we would use an enterprise fund. You'll note the two bullet points on why, and then of course see some additional examples of transactions that would be used in a proprietary type, specifically an enterprise fund. Now the next slide, again, try to figure out the fund category and then the specific fund name. So as you can see, what's red and underlined, there is a central printing activity. That, of course, is a typical internal service fund. It is a proprietary type, and that is because it's providing services to other governmental funds inside of the department of the city government. You'll notice the examples at the bottom. Central Motor Pool, which is kind of like the car renting service that IU also has. Here's our third problem, where you can see some governmental units have decided to pool their resources. And they are going to build and operate an airport. I know some of you may have immediately thought capital project fund, but recall that if this is not the general government, which an airport is generally not, we're going to use proprietary type. And because the main primary customer isn't just the government employees, it needs to be enterprise. In problem 4, you can see that there's some dedicated resources, and then they talk about how they're going to generate those resources, and they're going to be used for a specific purpose. Well, that's going to let us know it is governmental type, but further, it is a special revenue fund. You'll notice the two bullet points on why it is a special tax for a purpose, and then we're going to use it for something other than debt service or capital project. That is a very important thing to note. Prior to selecting special revenue fund, you must determine whether or not it could be considered debt service or capital project first. If it's not one of those, then you would select special revenue. At this point, I want you to go ahead and review the Class 18 slides on top and to answer those questions. If you find you have any further questions, I will probably begin a short online discussion forum so that we can further discuss any examples or things you may have seen. Thank you, and have a great weekend.